When I tell Cambodians old enough to remember Haing Ngor that I'm investigating his murder, I often get the same reaction. Did you know his brother is Sarun? In the 1990s, Sarun was the director of Cambodia's forestry department. That fact alone makes some people think that Sarun is linked to Ngor's death. To understand why, we have to look at the forestry trade. You've probably heard about conflict diamonds. They're so valuable that in parts of Africa, control over diamond mines causes civil war. A Cambodian equivalent is wood, tropical hardwoods. Timber is worth a fortune, making forestry an incredibly dangerous economic sector. It's controlled by Cambodia's most powerful families, the so-called Timber Mafia. That includes Sarun and the family of former Prime Minister Hun Sen. When Ngor went back to Cambodia in the 1990s, he dove into the forestry sector head first. He bought a lumber mill, which he was struggling to get off the ground at the time of his death. That's why some people think he was killed by his own brother, possibly with the cooperation of Hun Sen. Others assume his death was somehow linked to the forestry sector that Sarun controlled. I've been building up to this episode for a while now. My name is Patricia Noonan, and this is Who Killed Haing Ngor? I want to shout out a colleague right at the top. This episode would not have been possible without the help of journalist Tetsugoro Igarashi. One impression I have about Haing Ngor? He had a real nostalgic streak. In Los Angeles, he drove a beaten-up old Mercedes. I'm guessing it brought back warm memories of a family Mercedes he used to borrow to take girls out in Phnom Penh before the Khmer Rouge takeover. Growing up, Ngor and Sarun's father owned a sawmill, like the Mercedes it's described in Ngor's memoir. So it's not surprising to me that when Ngor went home to Cambodia, he invested in a sawmill himself. Nostalgia was probably a factor. The mill was on Route 5, about 11 kilometers north of Phnom Penh. The United Nations peacekeeping mission was underway. Democratic elections were being organized. Foreign investors were flooding in. Ngor had an American partner who owned half the lumber mill. For the moment, I'll call him Mr. Smith. He may be relevant in future episodes. As an investor, forestry made perfect sense. Not only was Ngor familiar with the trade from childhood, he had that family connection. His brother was the director of forestry. Still, it's a little odd. Ngor went to med school. He was a doctor, thrust into life as an actor and an activist. Now, in his early 50s, he's decided he's a businessman. A quick note on names. Sarun's original name was Ngor Sarun. He's sometimes referred to as Ngor Hong Sarun. The family was Khmer on their mother's side and Hakka, an ethnic Chinese minority, on their father's side. During the Khmer Rouge period, Sarun dropped the Chinese name Ngor. The Chinese are associated with a merchant class, so he was probably trying to hide his family's relative wealth. So even though their names don't match, Haing Ngor and Sarun were brothers. Ngor was 8 years older. When was the first time he met Mr. Sarun? What were your impressions of him?
I
noticed this everywhere in Cambodia. Every Cambodian, that they had very bright eyes, looking toward a bright future because they just survived the Pol Pot regime and trying to support Haing Ngor and create a new country. That was the whole atmosphere there in Cambodia.
This is Koji Okada. He's 66 years old. He's a Japanese businessman who's been working in Cambodia since 1984. That's just 5 years after Vietnam invaded, ousting the Khmer Rouge. They installed a government headed by Prime Minister Haing Ngor, who'd soon be replaced by Hun Sen. Okada's been in Cambodia so long, he's almost a godfather-type figure. He knows nearly everyone in the Japanese community and most in the Cambodian government. He became a major player in forestry. In 1996, Okada launched Colexim, short for Cambodia Okada Lumber Export-Import. It was a massive joint venture between Okada's company, Okada Mokuzai, and the Cambodian government. At this point, you might be wondering, hang on, why am I talking about the Japanese community? After Ngor bought his lumber mill, eventually he leased it to a Japanese group. We'll be coming back to them.
その当時って正直言ってこっちから
There wasn't much in terms of resources that Cambodia could export or offer to the outside world. Logging and lumber mills were something. Wood was actually the only thing Cambodia could export and make money.
In fact, logging and the black market sale of lumber helped sustain all of the armed factions throughout the 1980s, during Cambodia's bitter civil war. It was usually sold across the border into Thailand. This is Mike Davis. He was a Cambodia country representative for Global Witness.
Through the latter stages of the Civil War in the 1990s, both sides, well, all sides, perhaps a better way of putting it, had got the idea that there was easy money to be made through logging operations. The Khmer Rouge did it, and this helped sustain them during the latter phases when they couldn't really count on external support from governments in the way that they had previously, and their battlefield enemies on the side of the Cambodian government, they got into it too. So if you like, the top people on both sides who carried on being powerful after the Civil War had ended had sort of got the bug. They got the idea this was a good way to raise revenue in a manner that was, quick and dirty and relatively discreet.
And the environment itself apparently just didn't cross their minds. It would be hard to discuss forestry in Cambodia in the 90s without bringing in Global Witness. They're an international NGO that focuses on the intersection between the environment and human rights. Mike Davis came in a little bit later, but Global Witness got their start in Cambodia around the same time I did in the early 1990s. Now, forestry is an absolutely massive topic, and I can't possibly cover all of it in its myriad facets in one podcast episode. You're just getting a glimpse of it here. But when the UN and the rest of the international community flooded into Cambodia, they were aware that logging, and in parts of the country, the illegal gem trade, had perpetuated the Civil War, just like conflict diamonds in Africa. Now, logging threatened to derail the country's fragile peace. Facing pressure from international power brokers like the UN, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, the Cambodian government imposed a timber export ban in 1995. But that didn't stop the forestry trade. It just drove it underground.
Well, timber mafia is the term that we would use to describe the collection of people who were controlling the most important illegal logging operations in the country in the mid-2000s and since then.
Making money off logging comes down to who controls supply chains. At various links in those chains, there's opportunity for corruption.
Essentially, if you wanted to be doing a logging operation of any significant scale and value, it would have to be illegal, and it would have to be carried out by or with the tacit permission of the top families in the land. And if you had that, then you could be fairly confident that, albeit through the facilitating effect of bribes sort of up and down the chain of command, you would also be able to get protection or at least acquiescence from the Forest Administration, the Ministry of Environment, the police, the military police, and various military units. So it was a kind of shadow system.
For a logging company, you pay bribes to access forested land. You pay bribes at scores of checkpoints along the highways. There'd be payoffs to local military units or to the Khmer Rouge to access the territory they had. For larger concessions, you're bribing more senior officials. The entire system is based on corruption. So if you can figure out a way to become a link within the supply chain, that's a fantastic way to make money. How do you do that? Well, you pay off Chon Sarun. In Ngor's time, he was the director of forestry and wildlife, but he'd go on to become the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries in 1998.
And so that put him in a position where he could be making decisions, or at least executing decisions from above, which would allocate, for example, a forest concession to a certain company, a piece of forested land to another set of interests for the development purportedly of a plantation, which might provide a handy pretext for an illegal logging operation. So that was one way in which he had a lot of power.
This is how corrupt it is. In one scheme in the early 2000s, Chon Sarun and another top official actually set up an auction for jobs in the Forestry Administration, meaning you could buy your way into being a link in that supply chain. Chon Sarun personally made an estimated $2.5 million in the scheme. That's according to Global Witness's landmark report, Cambodia's Family Trees. And that's just one instance of institutionalized corruption within a massive sector.
And this was a very ruthless group, which, amongst other things, we found evidence that they forcibly took over a Taiwanese logging company's factory and held the factory owner, a Taiwanese citizen, hostage within the factory because of his failure to pay them money which they believed that he owed them. So yeah, very powerful and very dangerous people. We documented incidents where one of this group trying to kill two members of a community forestry group in Kompong Tom province who got in the way of
So Ngor found himself on the periphery of these powerful government circles. That's partly because his brother was already there. And it's partly because the killing fields had done so much to expose Khmer Rouge atrocities to the world. One prominent Cambodian told me, the film was almost like Cambodia's first ever human rights report. It helped convince the international community that the Khmer Rouge could not be allowed to return to power. That is no small thing. Hun Sen and everyone in those elite circles, they all virulently hate the Khmer Rouge. Hun Sen especially has dedicated his entire career to preventing the Khmer Rouge from ever coming back. That makes it sound like as an investor, Ngor would have it easy. And maybe he could have. But some Cambodians really resented former refugees like Ngor who'd resettled in wealthy countries, while they had to stick it out through the Civil War. Koji Okada was running in those elite circles since the 1980s.
その前、まだ80年代後半ぐらいから、カンボジア難民で日本にいたやつとか、うちを、I
hired Cambodians that were refugees, so I was aware of that atmosphere. The attitude of ordinary people and high-ranking officials in the Hun Sen regime was that these people, who came back to Cambodia only after it became safe, were quitters. They threw away their homeland for their own safety. And there was a lot of ill will towards those people who came back.
Ngor bought his sawmill in 1992, but a mill is useless without wood to process. You need cut trees coming in. You need a forestry concession. In the early 90s, there were two options. One, you could bribe the Khmer Rouge to cut trees in the territory they controlled. Ngor refused, according to interviews his friends gave to the Los Angeles police after his murder. Two, you could get a concession from the director of forestry, Chon Sarun. So Ngor asked his brother. But as listeners know, they didn't get along. Chon Sarun turned him down. I'm at the Haing Ngor Green Grass Primary School with a colleague. Let's go see if we can find a school principal or someone and find some permission to wander around and talk to people. It's in Takeo province, and we're not far from Ngor's hometown in Samrongyong. It's one of at least 3 schools that Ngor built. So we can see the original building that Haing Ngor funded. It says 1994 on the side, which must have been the year they inaugurated it. But it's a faded yellow. It's a very common color in Cambodia. And it's all boarded up. It could use a paint job. It could use some new doors. So it's clearly fallen into disrepair. But over to the left, we have a brand spanking new school in white concrete. And this is where all the activity is happening. This is where all the classes are currently going on. And this is very modern and very up to date. I'm not going to share my colleague's name. Cambodia, after all, is an autocratic state. But together, we tracked down the deputy headmaster. Once he heard that we were interested in Ngor, he sent an assistant to a nearby village who came back with Om Yuen. He was 80 years old at the time of this interview, and he knew the Ngor family back in the 1970s.
Before the school was built, the children studied at the district chief's office. But when more children came, there was no room, and so they studied under a palm tree. Later, Ngor came and saw there was no school. He requested to build a school here.
Yun dropped something else in the course of the chat. Apologies, the audio's not very good here.
Yes, I watch that every year. So Haing Ngor play the key actors in that film.
So who shows it? Is it on TV?
TV.
It's on TV every year. Om Yuen says he's seen the killing field several times because it's played every year on TV.
They show every year on TV.
On just Cambodian TV?
Cambodian TV.
All right, so clearly Hun Sen must like it. This was actually the first time I'd heard that the killing fields is on television every year. Since that visit in 2023, other people have told me it's on multiple times a year. It turns out former Prime Minister Hun Sen may have a touch of nostalgia for Ngor. The voice you hear now is that of my colleague who's translating the words of Deputy Headmaster Chom Sarit.
Anyway, Hun Sen, he make a trip to Takeo. On the way on road 2, he stopped by at the market. Then he asked the people where's the school located. So the people that bring him to here, and then he saw the school was old and broken, and then he come and pay for this new building and the next building in the school that time.
So Hun Sen specifically wanted to renovate this school because of Haing Ngor?
They wanted to change the name of the school as well. But Hun Sen said no need to change the name of the school. Just keep the old name of the school. Haing Ngor Green Grass Primary School. That's why he kept the same, but he paid to renovate these old buildings.
I find that very interesting. 20 years after Ngor was murdered, then Prime Minister Hun Sen took time out to visit the school. He wanted the community to keep Ngor's name on it. In return, he paid for the renovation. Back in 1995, Haing Ngor had a lumber mill that he couldn't get off the ground. As we heard in my last episode, Old Friends, Cece visited in July, and there was hardly any equipment. That's because when Ngor bought the mill in 1992 from a Thai businessman, he skipped town without paying any of his staff, according to LAPD records, so they looted some of the equipment. This is another dip in Ngor's financial roller coaster. He had to buy equipment and cover the cost of paying the back wages for that staff. So Ngor was in a tough spot. He refused to bribe the Khmer Rouge, and his brother wouldn't give him a forestry concession. Finally, he caught a break. Ngor struck a deal with 3 Japanese businessmen. They would lease the mill from him to process their own timber. They signed a contract in early 1996, a copy of which was provided to me by the Innocence Center. So, who were they? For this part of the investigation, I hired Japanese journalist Tetsugoro Igarashi, or Tetsu for short. He's fabulous. He's the one who tracked down Koji Okada and translated for me. He also dove into researching our trio of Japanese investors. Their names are Mitsugi, Kawakami, and Ogura. Using Japanese business records, Tetsu established that Mitsugi was $3 million in debt when he went to Cambodia. He'd had a previous failed forestry venture in Madagascar. That's $6.1 million in 2025 terms. Koji Okada never met Haing Ngor, but he knew everyone in the Japanese community and he visited the lumber mill. It was near Colexim's headquarters. And Okada was seriously unimpressed. To him, these Japanese businessmen were dangerous and shady. He even used the term thug a few times. So I just want to clarify, when he says shady, I think there's a scale. There are people who are a little bit dishonest, but then we know, there's also organized crime. So specifically with Kawakami and Ogura, does he think they were just dishonest, or does he think they were mixed in with organized crime?
カンボジア難民で日本にいたやつとかうちを通訳代わりに使ったりしてたわ。
I was in the business, so I knew the material. I was very surprised to see how bad their material was. I couldn't believe a Japanese professional would have put out products that inferior. That's not to mention that the business itself was fraud, given the fact that the exporting license was fake. The Cambodian government never issued a license to the factory, nor the products, but the products were exported to Japan. People who work like that are not Yakuza or organized crime, but they're trying to make their name in a place where people didn't know their track record. That's why I call them shady.
Now here's an unfortunate detail. Ngor signed a 5-year contract with a Japanese group, during the course of which he'd earned $660,000 in 1996 money. That's about $1.36 million today. Ngor was about to receive a 10% down payment, or $136,000, on March 1, 1996, according to the contract. But 4 days before that, he was killed on February 25th, 1996. He never saw a cent. Weeks after Ngor's death, one of the Japanese groups sent a fax to a lawyer representing Ngor's estate. They weren't making any claims. They were open to renegotiating the contract, but they were confused as to who was the rightful heir. Tetsu tried to track down the Japanese investors.
Chiba Prefecture, which is like an hour away from here, just on the east side of Tokyo.
Mitsugi has died. Tetsu did a heroic job and found a relative of his in the greater Tokyo area.
So I drove there, virtually knocked on every Mitsugi store.
He died estranged from his family because of his mountains of debt. We had no luck with Kawakami or Ogura. This was Cambodia's Wild West and compassion fad era, so we can only assume that the Japanese trio would have honored that contract. I have no idea how or where they got their forestry concession. But I don't think the Japanese group had anything to do with Ngor's death. I'll trust Okada's judgment that they weren't wrapped up in organized crime. To me, they look like run-of-the-mill vulture capitalists, hoping to exploit Cambodia's lawlessness to make some easy money. Plus, they simply had no motive to kill him. As for Okada, he heard rumors about Ngor's murder.
The rumor, not that many Cambodians even cared, was that Chan Sarun's brother was shot, killed in America. So we heard it was issues among the Cambodian Americans, and it was something related to money. And the guess was that Dr. Ngor borrowed money from dangerous people in America.
Ngor's lumber mill was taken over by Sarun, according to probate documents. But he made good on Ngor's contract with his American partner, Mr. Smith, and granted him 50% of the mill. Global Witness's searing reports on institutionalized corruption and the pillaging of Cambodia's forests prompted two of the country's major donors to suspend their support for Cambodia in 1997. That was the IMF and the World Bank. The forestry sector would have to be cleaned up if Cambodia wanted funding. Okada's joint venture Colexim was one of the casualties. It ceased operations in 2003. Soon, Global Witness's own luck ran out. Working there just got too dangerous, and they were forced out in 2005.
The investigations and the campaigning became more on high-level corruption of this mafia type involving people who were part of the top families in the land, and that was increasingly seen as threatening by people in the Cambodian government, and that is the reason why the work became increasingly hazardous, why members of our staff were attacked, why our country representative was beaten up outside the office. We had been deemed an illegal organisation, and the two foreign members of staff who were working in the country at the time, that was myself and one other, were put on a visa ban list. That coincided with very serious threats to one of our Cambodian investigators and substantial threats to other members of staff, and we felt we had no choice except to close our office at that point and continue the work from outside once more.
It remains a life-threatening proposition to be an environmental journalist or activist in Cambodia. A Khmer journalist was murdered in 2024. 2 journalists were attacked by gunmen this year, but they managed to escape. A third was physically attacked and then threatened with lawsuits. Also in 2025, a British journalist was banned from re-entering Cambodia. All were reporting on illegal logging. There are a lot of human rights groups like Global Witness, and they criticize companies like Colexim because they say they're doing environmental damage that's severe, and it's these are corrupt deals that are benefiting the very wealthy. And so I want to give Mr. Okada a right to respond to that kind of criticism. What does he make of it?
To be honest, those environmental NGO people, to me, they're fuckers. They're really stupid and think about themselves. Because of them, the IMF and the World Bank took the direction that they took. It's all because of them and their stupidity. Their claim was that the forests are being destroyed in Cambodia, but the blame goes to them. There's no more forestry business in Cambodia now. It's the military cutting down all the trees. The NGOs, the Global Witness people, don't protest against the Cambodian military. They pick the weaker ones and calling them names and attacking them. So that's my view. Of course, with the environment, no bribery, no corruption. Those words sound very good, I agree. But you have to look at reality. So to me, they're very selfish. They're doing what they do to make money and feel good about themselves. They're the ones who are corrupt, as far as I'm concerned.
He went on, disputing climate change and even bad-mouthing Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg. But he's right about one thing. Cambodia's forests are still being cut down. After Colexim shut, Okada ran a Japanese restaurant in Phnom Penh. He now appears to be semi-retired. Sarun is no longer the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries. He was removed from that post in 2013. That's after a 15-year run. As Global Witness reports, Cambodia's forestry sector is run by a timber mafia. They're powerful, dangerous people. That's why so many people are suspicious of Chan Sarun for Ngor's murder. Others add the twist that Prime Minister Hun Sen must have somehow been involved. To me, it doesn't add up. Chan Sarun refused to grant Ngor a forestry concession, and Ngor wouldn't pay the Khmer Rouge a bribe to log in their territory. The sawmill hadn't earned a penny by the time he died, as far as we know. So Chan Sarun had no profit motive to kill his brother. If Chan Sarun wanted the sawmill to make money, he would have given Ngor a forestry concession. More importantly, if you're a director of forestry as corrupt as Global Witness says, you don't make your fortune off a single lumber mill. You run the entire sector. You make money off all the sawmills, all the concessions, all the exports, all those corrupt links within the larger supply chain. This is not petty corruption. This is a mafia state. Could someone have killed Ngor to try to get back at Chan Sarun for something? That seems unlikely. Ngor's friend Sisi knew that they'd fallen out, so it's quite possible others in those powerful circles did as well. There is nothing that touches upon that possibility in any of the statements given to the LAPD. Did former Prime Minister Hun Sen kill Haing Ngor? Some Cambodian figures, including King Sihanouk, suggested as much. But why would Hun Sen insist, 20 years after Ngor's death, that the Haing Ngor Greengrass Primary School keep its name if he didn't respect the man? This is a dictator whose autocratic state plays the killing fields on state-run TV every year. Some have told me they play it multiple times a year. The last thing I want is to be a defender of Hun Sen. He's linked to death squads, the assassination of journalists, the imprisonment and assassinations of opposition figures. He launched the 1997 coup d'etat that overthrew Cambodia's nascent democracy. Read any human rights report from the past 30 years to see all of that documented. If Hun Sen wanted Ngor dead, he could have made that happen in Cambodia, just like all the others. But Hun Sen staked his entire career on preventing the Khmer Rouge from returning to power. A movie called The Killing Fields played a major part in that. So did Haing Ngor. Unless startling new information comes to light, I'm eliminating both Prime Minister Hun Sen and Chan Sarun as suspects. If anyone has any information or evidence to counter that, I'm eager to hear it. On a trip to Phnom Penh I made in September 2023, Chan Sarun, who was then 73 years old, agreed to do an interview. My Cambodian colleague and I were invited to his house in Takeo province. I was excited. This interview would obviously be a big deal for me. The night before the interview, Chan Sarun called and said he was sick and postponed by 24 hours. The following day he canceled again and said he had to be in Parliament, but we could meet after the session. So we waited, and we never connected. He ignored our calls. You know where this is going. We ended up getting ghosted my entire trip. On a 2025 trip, my colleague and I managed to get through to Chan Sarun on the phone. He said he didn't want to talk, but we could text him some questions. So we did. One was a straightforward request for help with my investigation. Once again, we got ghosted. Frank from the Innocence Center and I, together, requested an interview with now former Prime Minister Hun Sen earlier this year. It's 7 months later now, and we haven't gotten a response, despite repeated follow-ups. Ngor went back to Cambodia and got involved in forestry, one of the most corrupt, mafioso economic sectors there is. Maybe he was naive. Maybe he was indulging his own sense of nostalgia and grieving his past. Or maybe Ngor thought he had what it takes to swim with the sharks, because forestry wasn't the only dodgy area where he tried to get involved. We're nearing the end of Season 2. I've come to think of what I've been investigating as the known unknowns of Haing Ngor's life and death. Next time I'll recap what we've learned and we'll pivot to where the story goes next as we head into Season 3. My name is Patricia Noonan and this is Who Killed Haing Ngor? If you knew Haing Ngor or have information you think is relevant, please get in touch at whokilledhaingngor@gmail.com. I'm on Telegram as MP Noonan. If you'd like to support the investigation, there's a donation button on my webpage, whokilledhaingngor.com. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.